Claire stood at the bay window of her restored Victorian home, watching the golden September light pour over her garden. It had taken her nearly a decade to build this life, peaceful, independent, entirely her own. So when the call came from her mother that morning, it hit her like a chill cutting through sunlight. "We'll be holding Carson's wedding at your house," her mother said, without preamble. "It's only appropriate. It was your grandfather's estate." Claire blinked, the words not fully registering. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me," her mother snapped. "The family has decided. You have the space, and it's time we all come together again. We'll need the place on the 15th. There was no question, no invitation. Just a command dressed in cold entitlement. Claire's throat tightened, but she didn't respond right away. Because just hearing her mother's voice had already opened a door she had spent years nailing shut. In her mind, she was 18 again, standing on the gravel driveway outside this very house, suitcase in hand. Her father's voice still rang in her ears. "You want to live like that? Fine. But not under our roof." They had discovered she was gay, and within days, Claire had been thrown out with nothing but her clothes and the few dollars she had managed to save. Her bank account, previously funded by a trust from her late grandfather, had been frozen. When she tried to access it, she was told it no longer existed. Her parents claimed she had forfeited her rights by disgracing the family. Back then, she had no lawyer, no support, no understanding of how deeply her trust had been violated. Only a friend, Georgia, who let her crash on a sagging couch for a year. Claire scraped through community college, waited tables, worked nights, and never looked back. At least not out loud. But now, a decade later, they were calling. Not to apologize. Not to reconcile. But to use her. "I'm not agreeing to this," Claire said, her voice calm but firm. "This is my home." There was a pause, followed by the cold, brittle tone she remembered all too well. "Don't be selfish, Claire. You owe this family. After everything we've done for you." The laugh that escaped her was bitter and involuntary. "Everything you've done to me, you mean?" Her mother hung up. Claire stared at the silent phone, pulse hammering. It wasn't just the demand that infuriated her. It was the assumption that after everything, she'd still fall in line. That nothing had changed. That she hadn't changed. But she had. And now they would see just how much. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, the familiar creak of the old rafters above her stirring memories she hadn't let surface in years. The house had always been a refuge, even when it wasn't safe. Her grandfather's study, now her writing room, still smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco. She remembered how he used to let her sit on the floor beside his chair while he read ancient books and sipped tea. He had loved her, the only one who did, the only one who understood her. But when he died suddenly, she was told he'd left nothing. No money. No inheritance. Just some dusty books and a few old clocks. She'd believed it then. What else could she do? She was 17, grieving, and still desperate for her parents' approval. The betrayal only became clear years later. It wasn't until she was 23, working part-time in a legal clerk's office, that she stumbled across something strange. A client had mentioned irrevocable trusts, how they couldn't simply disappear, couldn't legally be revoked without consent. That night, a question took root in her mind like a thorn. She paid a freelance investigator $600, money she couldn't afford, and waited. What he found nearly broke her. A full trust in her name, signed by her grandfather and transferred to her parents' control days after his funeral. For safekeeping, according to the forged documents. And then liquidated. She never confronted them. Not then. Because she knew she'd be told she was imagining it. She had no legal ground by that point. Statutes had expired, papers were buried, the family name protected by polished lawyers and silence. So Claire swallowed the truth, focused on building her life, and let rage simmer under a cool exterior. For years, she thought the chance to strike back would never come. Till now. By 5 a.m. she had a plan. She brewed strong coffee, sat at her desk, and began to write. Not a letter but a contract. She would let them host the wedding here, but on her terms. Everything would be in writing. Any damage, any expenses, any property used, fully reimbursed. She'd require a massive non-refundable deposit. She'd demand legal waivers. She'd push them to the edge of discomfort under the guise of formality. And then when they accepted because she knew they would, pride too thick to refuse, she would peel back the layers. One by one. Carefully. Precisely. She already knew how to do it. For years, Claire had written anonymous articles for a legal reform blog, specializing in family trusts and financial abuse. She knew how inheritance fraud worked, how money was laundered within families, how generational wealth protected predators, how abusers cloaked themselves in the illusion of respectability. She had the voice. She had the facts. And soon she'd have the footage. She called Georgia, her old friend now a filmmaker, and told her everything. They would document it quietly. The preparations, the hypocrisy, the brittle smiles of people pretending they hadn't left her to rot. It wouldn't be revenge, Claire told herself. It would be truth. Quiet unveiling. Reckoning. She looked out the window at the garden again, this time not with peace, but with resolve. Her family wanted to step into her world. Her sanctuary, her life, her home. Let them. They had no idea they were walking into a mirror. And mirrors do not lie. They arrived 2 days before the wedding. 3 black SUVs crawled up the gravel drive like beetles under a storm-gray sky. Claire stood on the porch with her arms folded, watching the tires spit dust against the rosemary hedges she'd planted by hand. Her mother was the first to step out, dressed in a white linen blazer, too clean, too staged. Her father followed, expression unreadable behind expensive sunglasses. And then came her sister, elegant, glowing ring sparkling like a trophy. "Claire!" they called out, all smiles and open arms, as if nothing had happened. She returned the gesture with a tight-lipped nod, holding a clipboard instead of affection. They were stepping into her house now, her rules, her terrain. The contract had been signed, the deposit wired, every clause ironclad. Inside, the rooms were immaculate, the vintage furniture restored. The scent of fresh varnish and lemon oil filled the air. But beneath it all, cameras rolled quietly, nestled in corners and on bookshelves, capturing every passive-aggressive word, every fake compliment, every slip of disdain. Claire knew how to bait them, subtly, without accusation. She asked about the trust one night at dinner, voice casual. "Funny, I found an old account in Grandpa's name. Did you ever look into that?" A flicker in her mother's eyes. A knife pause in the air. "I don't recall anything like that," her father said smoothly, too quickly. "I do," Claire replied, sipping her wine. "But don't worry. I've got the paperwork." That night in her office, she pulled out the folder. Copies of the original trust, letters signed in shaky handwriting near the end of her grandfather's life, bank transfer trails, and a notarized confession from a retired legal assistant who once worked at her father's firm. All backed by years of quiet research, methodical preparation, and the help of a pro bono legal advocacy group she'd quietly partnered with 6 months earlier. She could have sent it all to the authorities already. But she wanted one more piece. Public exposure. Georgia and her crew weren't just filming a personal archive. They were making a documentary. Inheritance. A raw, intimate look at generational abuse, entitlement, and the invisible trauma of being gaslit by your own blood. They'd secured funding. They had a distribution deal. And the final scenes would unfold right here, on the day of the wedding. It was never about stopping the wedding. It was about what the wedding revealed. The night before the ceremony, Claire walked through the candlelit halls of the estate. Her estate. She stopped at a painting, her grandfather's favorite, and remembered one of the last real conversations they'd had. "I want you to have this house," he had said, voice raspy but clear. "They'll try to take it from you. Don't let them." She hadn't understood then, but she did now. The next day, as guests began to arrive and champagne flutes clinked under white canopies, Claire stood calmly in the foyer. Hidden cameras captured her sister laughing about how Claire had finally grown up, while their mother critiqued the floral arrangements. Georgia whispered through her earpiece. "We have it. Everything." And then Claire uploaded the video. Not the whole documentary. Just a 3-minute teaser. Voiceover by Georgia. Footage of Claire as a child in the house. Silent clips of bank statements, trust documents, and a blurred interview with the whistleblower. Over it all, Claire's voice. "Sometimes the people who raise you teach you how to lie. To yourself, to the world. But truth has roots. Wait. It grows." Within an hour it had gone viral. By evening reporters were calling. Legal forums were dissecting the trust structure. The wedding trended, for all the wrong reasons. Her family's name, once a badge of social clout, now appeared alongside words like fraud, manipulation, generational theft. Claire stood on the lawn as the chaos unfolded. Her mother demanded she take the video down. Her father threatened legal action. Her sister cried, mascara bleeding down her face. Claire just smiled. "I told you," she said softly. "Everything has consequences." The lanterns hung low over the town square, casting a warm amber glow that flickered against the anxious faces gathered beneath. The annual Harvest Festival had always been a time for celebration, unity, and old traditions. But tonight, beneath the strings of lights and the scent of spiced cider, something far more charged simmered just beneath the surface. Claire stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, her breath misting in the cool autumn air. Around her, townsfolk danced and laughed, but her mind drifted back to the moment years ago when she first realized the chasm between appearances and truth. She remembered sitting in her grandfather's worn study, the faint smell of tobacco and old paper in the air, as he handed her a faded leather-bound journal. "Secrets aren't always meant to be buried," he had said quietly. "They're lessons waiting to be learned." That journal was the first thread she'd pulled, unwinding a tapestry of lies stitched through generations. Tonight, that thread would lead her to face the last, most dangerous knot. As the festival band struck up a familiar folk tune, the crowd parted, revealing her sister approaching, poised, flawless, the very image of the family's polished facade. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "Claire," she began, voice sweet but sharp, "you've stirred up quite the storm. Do you really think airing our history in public makes you the hero?" Claire met her gaze steadily, the fire in her chest steadying her voice. "Not a hero. Just someone who finally stopped being afraid." The memory of their last heated argument flickered in her mind. The night before the wedding, when bitterness spilled over into accusations, and the family fractured like a cracked mirror. "You don't understand what you're doing," her sister had warned then. "This isn't just about us. You're destroying everything Grandpa built." But Claire had seen the truth behind those words. The empire built on silence and manipulation. Now, as the festival lights danced on her sister's sharp features, Claire knew the real battle was here, in front of everyone, where secrets couldn't hide in shadows. A hush fell over the crowd as the sisters stood toe-to-toe. Claire pulled from her coat a thin envelope, handing it to a local reporter who had been shadowing her since the video's release. The reporter nodded and began reading aloud. Documents proving the misappropriation of family funds, legal affidavits, even a recorded confession. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her sister's mask cracked, anger flashing dangerously in her eyes. "You think you've won," she spat. "This family doesn't fall apart over a few papers." Claire shook her head slowly. "It's not about winning. It's about truth. About breaking the cycle." Behind her, the festival's music shifted, softening into a melancholy melody that seemed to echo the weight of generations. In that moment, Claire glimpsed her grandfather's face in the crowd, a silent blessing from the past. The confrontation wasn't just a clash of wills. It was the tipping point of a long-buried reckoning, a final chance for healing or destruction. As the lantern swayed above and the crowd held its breath, Claire realized that whatever came next, she had already taken the hardest step, choosing courage over comfort, truth over silence. The days that followed the festival unfolded like a storm breaking over the town, unrelenting, chaotic, and impossible to ignore. Claire watched from the edges as the family's once untouchable name unraveled under the weight of truth. The headlines screamed betrayal, corruption, and greed. The community that had once revered them now whispered in suspicion and disappointment. Her sister's face was everywhere, on news screens in whispered gossip, her fall from grace as swift as it was brutal. But it was not just her sister who paid the price. The entire family's legacy, built on decades of whispered deals and quiet manipulation, lay in ruins. Claire remembered the long nights spent in her childhood home, sitting beside her father as he struggled to keep the family business afloat in the face of mounting scandal. The man who once seemed invincible was now a shadow of himself, weighed down by guilt and regret. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windowpane, Claire found an old photograph tucked inside a dusty album, a picture of her grandfather, standing proudly beside a young version of her sister and herself. Their faces were innocent then, untouched by the greed and power struggles that would come to define their lives. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Power without responsibility is a poison, Claire. It consumes those who wield it and those who depend on it." The truth of those words settled heavily on her heart as she watched the legal proceedings unfold. Courtrooms became battlegrounds where the family's secrets were exposed one by one, each revelation chipping away at their public image and personal relationships. Her sister faced charges that threatened to imprison her, a sobering reminder of how far the fall from grace could reach. Yet even in her darkest moments, Claire sensed a flicker of remorse, a painful acknowledgement of the consequences brought about by years of unchecked ambition. For Claire, the cost was different but no less profound. Friends distanced themselves, unsure whether to stand by the one who had exposed the family's darkest truths. The community's gaze turned wary, questioning her motives even as she sought justice. In the quiet moments, Claire grappled with her own sense of loss, not just of family ties, but of the innocence that had once defined her. She recalled the warmth of simpler days, before power and secrecy had cast their long shadows. But amidst the ruin there was a fragile hope, like the first green shoots pushing through cracked earth. The reckoning forced the family and the town to confront the rot beneath the surface. It opened a path toward accountability, healing, and, perhaps one day, reconciliation. Claire understood now that the price of abuse of power was steep, not just in punishment but in the shattering of trust and the loss of what truly mattered. As the sun set over the quiet town, painting the sky in hues of amber and purple, Claire stood alone on the hill overlooking the festival grounds. The echoes of celebration had faded, replaced by a solemn stillness. She whispered a silent vow to herself and to the memory of her grandfather, to carry forward the lessons learned, to wield power with humility, and to protect the fragile threads of truth that bind us all. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of silence that presses heavy on everyone present, waiting, watching, holding their breath. Claire sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap, as the judge's voice finally broke the tension. Justice, after all the turmoil and heartbreak, was about to be served. As the verdict was read aloud, Claire's mind drifted back to another courtroom years ago, a memory she had tucked away, one that now seemed eerily prophetic. She was a child then, clutching her mother's hand, watching a similar scene unfold. The accused was her grandfather, standing firm but weary, convicted not just by the law but by the moral weight he carried. The judge's words had echoed in the halls of their family home ever since. Justice is not vengeance. It is truth tempered with mercy. That memory grounded her now. The verdict confirmed the guilt of her sister and several others who had conspired to abuse their power and manipulate the system for personal gain. Sentences were handed down. Prison terms, hefty fines, and public reprimands. The law had spoken clearly, cutting through the shadows of privilege and deceit. But justice was not just about punishment. It was about balance. Claire remembered the moment years ago when she had confronted her sister in private, pleading for honesty, for a chance to set things right before the consequences spiraled out of control. Her sister's eyes had flashed with defiance, then softened with regret. "I never wanted it to end like this," she had whispered. "But I couldn't stop." That confession lingered in Claire's heart as she watched the aftermath unfold. Families fractured, alliances broken, but also a fragile hope that lessons had been learned. Outside the courthouse, the townspeople gathered, many with hesitant smiles and nods of approval. Claire saw in their eyes a cautious faith, not just in the law, but in the possibility of redemption. Later that evening, Claire returned to the old family home, now quiet and stripped of its former grandeur. She wandered through the rooms, each filled with echoes of laughter and sorrow, of dreams built and shattered. On a dusty shelf, she found a worn journal, her grandfather's handwriting neat and steady. Flipping through the pages, she found a passage that seemed written for this very moment. True justice is not blind. It sees the wounds beneath the surface and strives to heal them, even as it holds the guilty accountable. As night fell, Claire stepped outside, the cool air carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. The stars above were bright, silent witnesses to the ending of one chapter and the uncertain start of another. She realized that justice was not a destination but a journey, one that required courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the truth. With a steady breath, Claire embraced the path ahead, determined to honor the past while building a future where power would be wielded with integrity, and fairness would no longer be a distant hope but a living reality.